Hey guys, Will here. So today we're going to be taking a look at what I think are some of the best sim racing pedals I've ever tested here at Boosted Media. Now they aren't cheap, but they're certainly not as expensive as you might think they're going to be. So let's check out the VNM sim racing pedals. Let's go. So there's a lot to get through today, but firstly, a quick thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Micro Center. Now, if you're in the US, you're probably already familiar with Micro Center as one of the best places to browse and search for any kind of electronic gizmo, from PC components all the way through to things like TVs and audio systems. What you might not know is that they also have a rapidly growing collection of sim racing hardware. So this is really great for sim racers because it means you finally have the opportunity to get eyes and even in some cases hands-on with sim racing products before you buy them. Now, as a new customer, if you register via the link down in the description, you'll get $25 off your purchase of $100 or more. And they've even got a new sim rig builder on their website. So you can check them out via the link down in the description below or visit your local Micro Center today. So as always, firstly, a big thank you to VNM for sending across their pedals for us to check out today. Now, we will be cross-comparing this against a range of different products in today's video. So it's important that you guys know that all of those products have been supplied to us under exactly the same circumstances, all free of charge for us to evaluate and make our content. Now, if you do decide you want to pick up any of the gear that you see discussed in today's video, there will be some links in the description down below. Those are an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media at no additional cost to you if you find what we do here useful and you want to help support us. So we really do appreciate your support there. But as is always the case, nobody has any sort of external control here whatsoever. Nobody gets to see the video before you guys do. So let's dive in now and start off by talking about pricing. Now, I said at the start of the video that these are some of the best sim racing pedals that I've ever tested. And I've tested some really high-end stuff here on the channel, which costs many more times what these pedals cost. Now, we're discounting the active pedals from SimiCube out of this equation because those are just crazy expensive and obviously have a lot of features that something like this doesn't have. If you're interested in those, you can check out the review down in the description down below. But some of the more common pedal sets that we've tested here, which come in at the same kind of build quality and driving experience of this, come from the likes of Husinvelt with their Ultimate Plus pedals. The VRS Direct Force Pro pedals were fantastic as well. Acertec Sim Sports have their Invicta and Forte pedals, as well as their new La Prima pedals, which actually come in at a much lower price point, but still deliver a very good driving experience. But these pedals are going to vary in pricing quite significantly depending on where you are in the world, what kind of import duties, taxes, and shipping costs are involved. But make sure you do your own research there to make sure you're getting the best possible deal for your particular location. And we will list a couple of affiliate partners for reseller options down in the description below for you guys as well. But to give you the baseline pricing here taken directly from the VNM website before any taxes, duties, or shipping costs, you're looking at $450 US for just the throttle and the brake. $550 if you want the throttle, brake, and clutch combo. So you can see here I've got the pedals mounted to a base plate. Now you can bolt these pedals directly to your rig depending on what type of rig you have, and I'll show you the mounts a little bit later on too. But if you do need the heel and base plate here, then you're looking at an additional $35 US. Now, that is something that is very heavy and expensive to ship. So depending on where you are in the world, you're probably going to see pricing which is a lot higher than that $30 US price point, but that is the price that they got listed on their website. I think here in Australia, it was about 150 Australian dollars if I'm not mistaken. But again, follow the links down in the description below or do your own research there for pricing. So that is the base plate option. One thing you will notice with the base plate is it does raise the heel position quite significantly. So make sure you keep that in mind and measure your rig to make sure that this is going to be compatible. If it isn't compatible, if it is going to cause you problems with your knees hitting the steering wheel, then you do have the option to just run whatever base plate and heel rest comes with your rig, and then just bolt the pedals directly to that. Then there's a brake pedal upgrade kit, which includes an assortment of elastomers and springs to dial in the brake pedal to exactly how you like it. And I do recommend you pick that up as well. You'll see why a little bit later on in today's video, but that comes in at $30 US. Then we also have the option for a damper kit, which includes dampers for all three pedals. That comes in at $150 US. Now, I've always been a little bit on the fence about damper kits, but I was actually really pleasantly surprised with the positive impact that they had on the driving experience of what is already a fantastic set of pedals here with these VNM pedals. So let's start off here by taking a look at some of the common features across all three pedals. Then we'll dive in and take a closer look at each of these pedals in more specific detail for you guys. So you can see a really nicely, in my opinion, presented black anodized aluminium assembly for most of the construction that we see here. So the cages on all three pedals, the arms in all three cases are nice, thick, as you can see, CNC machined aluminium. No sharp edges anywhere to speak of here. You can see how they've chamfered the sides of all the metal components here to make them nice and smooth. And even just on the edges of the pedal faces, even though they probably look like they're quite sharp here on camera, they actually do have quite a nice smooth, almost like they've been filed before they're anodized, although it seems to be machined rather than filed. Either way, it's not sharp anywhere to speak of, which certainly can't be said for a lot of other high-end pedals that we've tested in the past. That's been a nitpick of mine on some very expensive pedals. Now, if we turn the pedal sideways, you can see we've got an adjustment here for our pedal height, pretty much the same as what you'd find on a lot of other pedals these days, similar to the design of the Husing-Velt's Ultimate and Sprint pedals. So you've got a tilt adjustment here on the sides. Now, one thing I will just mention there while I'm thinking about Husing-Velt, the quality of the documentation that you get with Husing-Velt Sprints and Ultimate Plus pedals is absolutely fantastic. It takes you through all the different curves, adjustments, what the ratings are for the pedals, pretty much you name it, all the information's there. It really kind of walks you through the process. That is one area that's lacking a little bit with these pedals. The documentation isn't absolutely fantastic. We'll flash a couple of examples up on the screen for you, but really you're kind of on your own when it comes to fine-tuning things and adjusting things, which is okay. You can experiment. I would encourage you to do so. But just comparing the experience of actually unboxing and owning these pedals compared to Husing-Velt, I think it's fair to make that comparison. Husing-Velt do a much better job with their documentation. But nonetheless, there is plenty of adjustment available here. So on all three pedals, you can adjust the angle up and down. You can also adjust the pedal pad position up and down too, using the groove here. Now, I was a little bit concerned about this being a slot or a groove rather than just a fixed point on the pad itself, but in practice it seems to be absolutely fine. And yeah, as you can see, in terms of the construction and materials, we've got metal ball bearings on all of the pivot points for pretty much every single component, everywhere you look. Even where you have the inserts for the damper kit, which we'll look at a little bit later on, those are all riding on bearings as well. So just absolutely nothing to nitpick here at all in terms of build quality and materials used. You can see the bump stops here, which are a CNC machined aluminium insert with a polyurethane hose around the outside of them, and that creates a really nice soft end stop when you hit the pedal at full deflection. So you're not getting that metal to metal clunk, but you still have a nice solid when you push the pedal to 100%, but you're not getting that noisy return or bump stop at the end, which is something that I really appreciated about all three of these pedals. The clutch is a little bit more noisy. You get a little bit of spring rattling, even if you do make sure that spring has some preload on it. It does still rattle around a little bit, but in general, all three pedals are very, very quiet in their operation and incredibly smooth, as well, as you'll see later on when we get into the driving segment. Now, the throttle and the clutch also have an adjustment here on that bump stop. So you can see here, you've got a little piece of metal, which you can undo the two bolts, slide this forward and back, and that actually adjusts the physical position front to back of that bump stop, which limits the amount of mechanical travel. So quite a decent amount of range there. You can see on our throttle pedal right now, if I push that in, nice and far down. In fact, it was, if anything, it was probably a little bit too far for me. That's actually adjusted a little bit further forward than maximum, but yeah, plenty of travel available there. And as you'll see later on with the brake pedal as well, you can adjust that to be pretty soft all the way up to harder than even I would like, which is saying something, because I do like a very, very solid brake pedal, as I'm sure a lot of you guys will remember from some of our previous videos. But very high quality construction and materials all the way through here, even down to the little electronics module here too, which also is CNC machined aluminium, and that keeps the internal electronics protected from any electromagnetic interference. We've never had any issues ever with anything here at Boosted Media in terms of EMI, but we certainly didn't have any issues with this either. You can see nice quality connections here for our clutch, brake and throttle, which you can see the other end of just there. So those are very nicely presented. They also screw into place as well, so there's no chance of them coming unscrewed and damaged. One little nitpick that I did notice is that on our particular sample, you might be able to see there, two of the cables didn't have any heat shrink on the back of them, and you can actually see some of the shielding poking through there. These particular connectors do have a little strain relief which actually clamps down on the cable, so I don't think that's going to be a problem, but I did notice that our brake pedal has a little bit of heat shrink there, but the others two didn't. So maybe a little bit of a quality control issue there, but if you own a set of these pedals, let us know in the comments below whether you have the same thing on yours. Be interesting to know that. But yeah, not a major issue by any means. But high quality connections there for all three pedals. You'll also notice there is a handbrake connection on this control box as well. So if you have a VNM handbrake, which we've reviewed previously here on the channel, linked down in the description below for you guys, you can connect this through to the same control box here, and that frees up a USB port on your hub or your PC. Now, interestingly, on the other side of the control box, we actually have a USB-A connection. So it uses a USB-A to A cable to connect to your PC, which is a little bit interesting. And then we also have a little mechanical switch here on the side, which switches between normal operation mode and DFU or flash mode, very flashing the firmware on the device. But we'll take you through the software and how this all works a little bit later on in today's video. That is the control box there. And then continuing on with the theme of electronics, we have a 200 kilogram load cell on the back of our brake pedal, which you can see just there. Now, they don't actually document the total amount of pedal force at the pedal plate, which this pedal is rated to. Given the amount of leverage that we have here when we push on the pedal, my guess is that it's going to be less than 200 kilograms of pedal force, but that is just a guess on my part, somewhat of an educated guess, but a guess nonetheless. But what I can tell you is that there's absolutely no issue at all in terms of the maximum force on these pedals. Even the strongest people aren't going to have any issues with maxing out the load cell on these. Now, for those of you who might be comparing these against the Husingveldt Sprint pedals, for example, that is a pedal set that I did actually have an issue with being very, very close to maxing out that load cell. Those are rated to about 70 kilograms of pedal force, and I tend to brake somewhere between about 65 to 75 kilos, maybe even 80 kilos under some conditions if I'm wearing boots. So the Sprints weren't very well suited to me. I would have to go with the Ultimate Plus pedals, but a lot of people are absolutely fine with the Sprints. But this, for comparison, I'm pretty confident that nobody's going to have an issue with maxing out the load cell. So a load cell on the brake pedal, 200 kilogram load cell, and then on the throttle and the clutch pedal, both the same design. We've got a little module here, which is a Hall effect sensor. So what there is a little magnet somewhere in the assembly here, and then a little pickup in this assembly on this side. And what that does is it measures the variance in the electromagnetic field, and that variance is then outputted into the sim as a position. So it's a way of measuring the position of the pedal without having any sort of contact or physical moving parts like a potentiometer, which can potentially wear out over time, although most high-end pedal sets at around this kind of price point are using very high-end automotive grade potentiometers anyway, if they are using potentiometers. So I don't really see that to be an issue, but definitely on some of the cheaper pedals that we've tested out in the past, like Logitech pedals, for example, they can take on dirt and debris and wear out and vary in their output or become just unreliable over time. That's very unlikely to ever be an issue with Hall effect sensors, but not necessarily a massive selling point over something that uses potentiometers, as long as they're sealed units and nice high quality units. But yeah, Hall effect sensors for your throttle and your clutch, and a 200 kilogram load cell for the brake pedal. So just finally on the electronics, one more thing that we should mention is that the encoder on this little control box here is a 24-bit encoder. That means that you have, let me get this number right, 16,777,216 points of resolution throughout the stroke of a pedal. Now, that is very high. Whether or not you can feel the difference between a 16-bit and a 24-bit encoder, or even a 12-bit encoder for that matter, over the stroke of a pedal of a couple of inches is debatable at best. I certainly can't feel the difference between 16-bit and 24-bit, but maybe you can. I'm not going to argue that one, but either way, that's an extremely high resolution, which is going to translate to a lot of precision in terms of the input inside the game. So let's quickly take a look now at some of the more intricate features of each of these pedals, then we'll dive over onto the sim, take you through the software and the driving experience. So we'll move the brake and the clutch aside just for now and start off with the throttle pedal. Now, I've already got the damper kit installed on this pedal. I'm not going to take you through the full installation process of the damper kit. If you have a look at Sim Racing Garage's video on these same pedals, he did a very detailed breakdown on exactly the installation process. As I said before, the documentation isn't absolutely fantastic with these pedals, but I did find that video very useful personally, just to make sure that I wasn't making any mistakes. So by default, these pedals come with a standard assembly like this. You've got an adjustment here for preload. This goes into the little clevis, I guess you could call it, up here, and then this side sits in the little retainer on the back here. And as you push the pedal down, obviously the spring compresses and that goes in and out. So it essentially works the same way mechanically as the damper, the difference being that inside the damper you've got some extra intricacies which adds that damping effect as you would expect from a damper. So we'll go through exactly what the damper kit brings to the driving experience a little bit later on in today's video, but just to quickly let you know as well, there is an adjustment here on the back of the damper itself, so you can wind that up or down depending on how much mechanical resistance you want in the pedal. Now, it does feel quite nice to have it turned up quite high. It gives a nice kind of feeling of something connected behind the pedal. Even though it may not be particularly authentic, the throttle pedal in most cars is pretty sloppy, let's be honest. But one thing to be aware of when you are fine tuning this is if you crank it up too far, the pedal actually slows down a little bit in its return stroke. So you get a little bit of lag underneath your foot, which means it's not really following your foot back, which isn't ideal for sim racing. So just make sure you dial it in to suit the best balance between giving you that feeling or that sensation as you push the pedal down, but not having lag as you lift your foot off the pedal. But very simple design overall. But I mean, it doesn't really need to be any more complex than this. It all works. And again, as you can see, it's got metal ball bearings in all of the pivot points here, and just a very, very high quality construction overall. So there's not really a whole lot more to be said about the Throttle than that, really. Let's take a quick look at the clutch now too, and you can see this is a very similar design. In fact, it's actually using exactly the same cage as the Throttle pedal, which is something that's quite common in sim racing pedals. It keeps the costs down in production if they can run off the same part multiple times rather than having to manufacture extra parts. So again, you can see we do have the optional damper kit installed here. If we didn't have the damper kit installed, this area would just be completely blank. It just literally bolts in this position just here. And again, we'll talk about the difference that makes to the experience a little bit later on. But this particular pedal has a really great variance in feeling depending on what you want out of a clutch pedal. So if you like a nice linear feel, you can dial this to basically just be a straight shot, pushing the pedal down. You don't feel any change in sensation as you push it down. But because we've got this little floating arm here, which rotates as we push the pedal down, depending on how it's adjusted, what that means is you can get this nice kind of rollover effect as you push the clutch down. And that simulates the sensation of the bite point in the clutch quite nicely. Now, some people struggle to drive with that because it can mean that the clutch becomes quite clunky. So for me personally, I actually prefer a more linear feel in the clutch pedal. But the fact that you have the option here to choose exactly the feel that you want and pretty much anything in between is a really good thing. And I think they've done a really good job of providing that adjustability here. And again, a very, very simple design overall. It does all the things that it needs to very elegantly. And it's as simple as that. So let's finally take a look at the brake pedal. Now I have made a few adaptations here to the default setup. Again, you can see we do have the damper kit installed, which again just bolts in from the side and fixes in the little clevis on the front here. Now, one thing that you might notice here if you're familiar with these pedals is that I'm not running the stock standard elastomers here. These two elastomers are actually original, but the spacer, the third elastomer and the spring are actually from the upgrade kit, which you can see comes with an assortment of different Shore strength elastomers and springs to dial in exactly the feel you want. Now again, this is something that I think the documentation could definitely be a little bit better. Again, if you compare it across to what you get with Husingvolt, they actually include all the various different options as standard rather than having to pay extra, although the cost extra is quite small in this case. But their documentation in terms of explaining the differences that these make and the influence they have overall in numbers and graphs and everything is a lot clearer. There's not really anything here. They basically just say, feel free to experiment with this however you like to dial it in. And again, I do recommend experimenting with it. It's not too difficult to change out the elastomers. All you need to do is just wind off the preload on the spring, undo this little guy here, slide that out. Can be a little bit tricky to get back through again because you might have to try to push some extra preload on the spring just to get that hole to line up. So certainly not the easiest pedals to change out elastomers that we've ever tested, but not difficult by any means either. But basically what happens is when you push down on the pedal, you're compressing this elastomer stack. That is what's providing the resistance under your foot. And then depending on the combination of elastomers and springs that you use will determine the overall feeling. So by default, if you have a look at the spring that comes standard with the pedal, it's quite soft. And then you've got another softer elastomer here as well. So normally this guy would be here, this guy would be here. And you can imagine as you push the pedal down, this spring is going to compress first. That gives you the sensation of that initial uptake in the pedal where the pad is first coming up and interfacing with the rotor. And then beyond that, you start to push into the actual braking zone. So changing that spring out for the stiffer one that I have here still gives you that sensation of initial uptake, but just a little bit less sloppy under the foot. And then you can go all the way up to the red and blue springs here, which are again stiffer and stiffer again to the point where it almost becomes like just pushing up against a rubber block underneath your foot. So I like to have a certain amount of sensation or a clearly defined threshold point in the pedal. That is the way I like to set up pedals. But again, we'll discuss this when we get into driving a little bit later on. The important thing is that whether or not you like a really soft pedal, whether you like something that has a clearly defined threshold point like I do, or whether you want to have something that is just absolutely rock solid, so it's purely just force based, this is going to have you covered completely across the board. So all that's happening here is literally you're just pushing against those elastomers. Those elastomers are then exerting a force upon the load cell here. The load cell is fixed into the back of the cage here, so the bottom half of that stays put. The top half is able to slightly bend or deflect. And that deflection is what's interpreted by the strain gauge inside the load cell as the braking force and then fed across into your sim. So again, a very simple design here, but very, very effective in achieving the result. So we're almost through the hardware side of things now. I just want to quickly touch on mounting. So this is the heel rest and pedal tray as was sent to us. Now, one thing that I did clarify with them, I thought it was a little bit strange that we had silver profile when pretty much everything else on the pedals is black. They do tell me that if you were to buy one of these today, it does come with black profile. So yeah, just if that bothers you, don't worry about it. I already mentioned when we were talking about pricing earlier that this does raise the heel position up quite a bit. So you may find that if you run this plate on your rig at home, it ends up pushing your knees up into the steering wheel. Just to give you the measurement, that heel plate is sitting about 73 millimeters by my measurement above the mounting surface on your rig. So just make sure you account for that. And that's at the lowest setting. You can see here, we've got multiple slots here, which we can raise and lower or even tilt the pedal tray if we wanted to. That will allow us to raise it a maximum of 25 millimeters higher than what we have it now, should you wish to do so. And the way this would bolt down to your rig is just via these slots on the back here. So you may have to drill holes depending on your pedal plate. But for the majority of people that are looking at these pedals, you've probably already got a cockpit of some variety that has an integrated pedal tray or something. So you may not even need this at all. And it's great that it's an optional extra, especially given the shipping cost. It is a very low cost option to price out on their website. But when you actually go to buy one from a reseller, you may find it's a lot more expensive once they factor in shipping costs. Now, in terms of the mounting points on the pedals themselves, obviously you can just bolt this directly down to profile or to your pedal tray. You've got 25 millimeter long slots here with a 120 millimeter gap between the from edge to edge, basically. So if you're using M8 bolts, that would add an extra 4 millimeters on either side, or 8 millimeters total. So you'd be looking at 128 millimeters from center to center if you're wanting to align your channels. Most rigs have some sort of adjustability there, but if you want the measurements, that is what they are. So mounting is as simple as that, and I think that covers everything we need to in terms of hardware. So let's jump over on the rig now. I'll take you through the software and we'll dive into the driving experience. So let's take a quick look now through the software package you're going to be using if you buy a set of these pedals. So it's the VNM configuration tool, exactly the same software that you use for their shifter and handbrake. And you can see at the top here, we've actually got a tab for a bass and other hardware as well. But we're gonna stick to the pedal tab for today. Important to know, if you do have multiple devices from VNM, you will be using the same software package to manage everything, which is always a good thing. It means you don't have to load multiple packages of software for different bits of hardware, which is great. We're seeing that very commonly from a lot of manufacturers these days now, which is a very good thing. So pedal tab here, you can select the device from the list down here if you've got multiple devices connected. But in this case, we've only got the one, and then you can select the axis which you want to manipulate with the settings here as well. So we're going to start with the throttle. Now, as you saw earlier in the hardware look, there is that additional port on the control box for a handbrake too. So you can choose the handbrake as a selectable axis here to modify as well. But we're going to start with throttle, and you can see a curve will show up here on the right hand side, and we can set non-linear curves for response if we want. We'll look at that in just a moment. But to start off, over on the left here, we enable all the axes that we want to use. You can see I don't have the handbrake enabled because we're not using it. And you'll notice every area that we can make modifications has a little save button. If we hit that save button, you'll notice in the system log over on the right hand side that it's actually flashing that instruction or that setting back to the module or the EEPROM on the actual control module. And that's important because it means any calibrations are actually saved on the device itself, and then that calibrated signal is then what's outputted from the pedals, which means if you're calibrating the pedals in iRacing or something like that, it just makes things that little bit more simple. All you need to do is just push the pedal all the way to the maximum and the minimum, and the calibration that you've set here will carry through. So speaking of calibration, let's just quickly run through that process now. So you can see we've got the throttle selected up on the right hand side here. We're going to click on calibrate, and it simply just wants us, it doesn't actually give us any instruction, which is a little bit interesting, but basically all we're doing is just pushing to the maximum and then releasing back to the minimum. And you can see the minimum and maximum amounts here as a raw signal are inputted. And then once we're done, we just click on finish, and then we make sure that the bar on the top here is responding correctly to our input. Now you'll notice down here we also do have a dead zone. What I generally recommend doing is having a little tiny bit of top and bottom dead zone here. The top dead zone just allows you to make sure that you're reaching that 100% throttle mark, even if there's a little bit of a sensor calibration issue. So if the calibration slips a little bit, you're not going to be under throttling and not realizing that that's the case. So a little bit of under calibration there just helps to make sure that that is the case. And then the minimum calibration here is purely just how far you need to push the pedal down before it starts to respond. If you've got a habit of resting your foot on the pedal and having rogue inputs like that, then you can just dial that out here as well. It's a bad habit that I have, which is the reason why I have that. And you can see I've done exactly the same for the brake here too. So if we switch across to brake calibration now, you can see it is actually a little bit out because we've made some changes and installed the damper since I last calibrated. So we're going to click on calibrate. And in this case, what we're gonna do is we're gonna push to our threshold point, which is gonna be different for everybody. So that's the point where you feel the transition in the pedal, the point where you can hit your threshold consistently and accurately every single time. And then we're gonna push a little bit past that just to allow for panic braking to 100%. And then we're gonna release, and then we're gonna hit finish. And what we should find now is when I hit that threshold point, I should be reaching about 80% input, which is pretty much spot on exactly. I'm cheating because I'm looking at the screen, but you get the idea here. We want to be able to hit that threshold point consistently, basically. And you can see, again, I haven't bothered with a top dead zone here because it's a little bit redundant with a brake. We can also adjust our brake limit here too, but I have added just a little bit of minimum dead zone there just to make sure that if I'm resting my foot on the brake, I'm not getting any input. Now, if you've got one of the weaker springs installed for that initial uptake, then that's going to be more critical because you will find that it's easy to have a little bit of input there and just sort of be dragging the brake without intentionally doing so. So the calibration process for the clutch is exactly the same as well, so I won't show you that now. Basically the same as the throttle. We just push to the maximum, release to the minimum, and we're good to go. And again, we can set top and bottom dead zones for our clutch and our handbrake if we wish to do so, all in the same software. Then on the right-hand side here, as we touched on earlier, we can set non-linear responses as well. So say we're driving something that's a little bit underpowered, like our MX-5, for example, and we want to have that throttle come on a little bit more aggressively because we're not worried about lighting up the rear tires coming out of a corner exit. We might want to set something a little bit more like what we see, definitely not that. I don't know why you'd want that for a throttle. That's more like what you might want for a clutch. But let's go exponential 2 here. Yeah, so you can see what this is doing is it's ramping up that throttle more aggressively at the start and then tapering off as we get further on. So it just means you're gonna get a little bit more aggressive input on the throttle. Now, one thing you might have picked up with this exponential 2 preset is that it does taper off here at the very end, which isn't really suitable for a throttle pedal. So if we hit save here, you'll actually see when I push the pedal down, we get to about probably 90% actual physical pedal application. And then you'll see as I push down to 100% on the pedal, it's actually dropping down again. So if we did want to have that sharper response, we would just want to make sure that we drag these nodes all the way to the top, just so that we're maintaining 100% throttle application. So we hit save again, and now we should see as we push that pedal to 100%, it will remain at 100% in terms of what the game is seeing. If you're driving something that's really high powered and rear wheel drive, so say a Porsche Cup car, for example, you might want to go with something that's a little bit more like this if you're finding that you're getting too much wheel spin out of the corners. It just allows you to be a little bit softer on the throttle application and then get on the power as you start to open up the steering and get out of the corner. Now you can fine tune these as well. These are just the presets that are sitting there. So you can click on each node and actually drag them up and down to basically just adjust this to respond however you want. Now, I don't generally run a non-linear response curve on any brake pedal. A lot of people I know do though, so it's worth just experimenting, watching some other people's reviews as well to see how they've set their pedals up and then find, and basically it's just trial and error. You wanna experiment and fiddle around with these things until you find what's gonna suit you best. Now, if you're wanting more information on how I suggest you set up pedals, I do have a dedicated video for that runs you through all of this stuff in a lot more detail and will hopefully give you a lot more confidence if you're looking at setting up a set of load cell pedals for the first time. So I'll link down in the description below for that if you are interested. So once you've got everything set up here, what you can do is save it as a preset or just flash it to the device like so, and you are good to go. So the software isn't the cleanest I've seen in terms of its presentation. It's maybe a little bit bootleg looking, but everything you need is there. And look, it's relatively approachable. I certainly don't have anything to complain about with it. So let's move on now into the driving experience. So let's talk about the driving experience with the VNM pedals. Now, straight off the bat here, very, very, very impressed with these pedals in every configuration that we tested. So I started out on the rig with just the basic 3-pedal set without the performance kit installed or the damper kit installed, and very, very impressed. There's a couple of things that I always look for in a set of pedals when it comes to just, I guess, indicators of the overall quality before we even get into what they're actually like to drive with. So things like slop or play in the pedals, absolutely none of anything like that with these pedals. They're really quiet in operation too, which was something that I also really appreciated. Even just, you know, maxing them out and returning them back to minimum. You can hear there, the dampers have got a little bit of a squish to them, but you don't have loud metal to metal contact on the full pedal stroke or return. And that's the same case for all 3 pedals. The clutch can be a little bit rattly depending on how you've got it adjusted, but again, there's no loud bump stop in either direction. That's due to the rubber bump stops that we looked at earlier on in the video. So yeah, look, build quality wise, all those initial things that I look for, absolutely fine, nothing to complain about whatsoever. Very, very smooth in their operation, even without those damper kits as well. So immediately right up there with the best of the best that we've tested with regards to all of those important things that I always look for under initial impressions. Now, over the years, I've been lucky enough to test out a massive variety of different pedal sets. I think by this point, we've probably tested about 50 different sets over the years, all the way from entry level through to something like your Simucube active pedals, which we reviewed just recently on the channel, in which I run on my daily driver rig. Now, obviously those are out of the question for the majority of people, just because they're prohibitively expensive. And I really do hope that that technology drops in price over time, because it is something that is really exciting for the industry. So over the years, there's been a couple of different sets of pedals that have really stood out to me in terms of value for money, or just being really excellent pedals in general. So the VRS Direct Force Pro pedals, in my opinion, up until I tested these at least, I would say were the best value for money when it came to something that's gonna suit a wide variety of different driving styles, plenty of adjustability there, very smooth in operation, and just very, very well engineered overall. Acertech, Invicta, Forte, and just recently we looked at the Prima pedals too. Those are all really, really excellent pedal sets as well, and excellent value for money. They don't have the range of adjustability that we have in a lot of the other options that we've discussed. And again, check out the review of those for the full picture on that. Now, they suited my driving style really well, and I actually ran the Invicta pedals on my daily driver rig for 18 months, moved to them from the Husingville Ultimate Plus pedals that we'd reviewed previously. And yeah, they suited my driving style really well, but they're not gonna suit everybody. So check out those reviews for more details on that. Then we have the Husingville Ultimate Plus pedals, which were probably what I would say the best engineered load cell pedals that I'd ever tested. Really, really fantastic documentation with those as well. Plenty of adjustability there, really high quality materials used throughout as well. And the overall impression that I had with those pedals was just that they'd obviously spent a lot of time refining the design, taking the original Ultimates and really stepping things up, refining things as they moved into the Ultimate Plus pedals. And that really showed in the end product. And I, again, would have been absolutely happy to run those pedals forever on my sim rig if I didn't have other options to test out as well. The Husingville Sprint pedals, fantastic as well, but they do have a limitation with the amount of pedal force that you can apply to the brake. So anything over about 70 kilos of pedal force, and you do start to max out the load cell on those pedals, and that was very close to my threshold for braking. So they didn't really suit me, but they're absolutely fine for a lot of people if you're not so into a really heavy brake pedal like what I prefer to drive with. So those are the pedal sets that I've kind of recommended in the past in terms of value for money, overall engineering, and just build quality and driving experience in general. So I wanted to sort of start off there as a baseline for what we're going to discuss with these pedals and what we're comparing to in terms of performance and value for money. So already given you my initial impressions with these pedals and why I immediately liked them straight out of the box before we even did any upgrades. So I tested them across a variety of different driving styles, including just your regular left foot braking like you would in a GT3 or GT4 car. I did a bunch of heel and toe with the clutch. I did some clutch kicking with some drifting as well. I tested pretty much everything out on these pedals. And whatever I threw at them, they just really impressed me. There wasn't really any scenario where I found that there was anything lacking. And I think that's just down to the overall adjustability that we have with these pedals. Without the performance kit, that initial uptake on the brake pedal is maybe a little bit softer than I would like, but it really again just comes down to your driving style. I quite like the sensation of having an initial uptake that kind of makes it that little bit more clearly defined exactly where that threshold point is. But I also don't like that initial phase to feel sloppy at all. And that's the reason why I've landed where I have with the elastomers that we're running on here now, which is sort of in the middle. We've got a considerably stronger spring in there now, just to take out some of that initial uptake. So what we've resulted in here is a nice smooth initial push in the pedal that still feels intentional and still has some force behind it. But then when we reach that threshold point, we're able to modulate around that really, really accurately. And I was able to match my lap times pretty much immediately with these pedals to anything I've ever done with Acertech pedals or Husingville Ultimate Plus pedals, or even my Simucube active pedals for that matter. So for me personally, I was able to dial that brake pedal in to feel exactly the way I like, but I did need that performance kit to be able to achieve that. With the standard configuration, it just did feel that little bit too sloppy for me personally. But if you prefer a softer pedal, then you might be absolutely fine with just the standard brake. But I would say if you're forking out this kind of money on a set of pedals, it probably is worth buying that performance kit just so you can experiment and you know, just learn what's going to suit you best. And I think a mistake that a lot of people make is they upgrade their pedals and then they find that they're immediately slower because of the learning curve and readjusting their muscle memory. So they then go to try and adjust their new pedal set to feel like what their old pedal set felt like, which is kind of counterintuitive, but it's something that I do actually see quite a lot. But look, in terms of the throttle and the clutch pedal in particular, the clutch, plenty of adjustment there. You can adjust it all the way from having a relatively linear feel like what I have here with just a small little second stage step right at the very end of the travel, to having a really clearly defined second step. So if you really like to have that clunk or that crossover point, you can achieve that and anything in between. So absolutely no complaints at all with regards to the clutch pedal. The throttle pedal in its default form felt absolutely fine. Like I've always commented that, you know, I'm not particularly sensitive when it comes to throttle pedals. As long as it's got enough throw and it springs back under my foot and it's not binding or grinding or crunching or feeling grainy or anything like that, I'm absolutely fine with most throttles. But one thing just to reiterate again that I did really appreciate about this throttle pedal is the quiet operation, particularly just reaching the end and returning. Often a lot of throttle pedals do have that clunking sound when they return back to zero. Not the case with this at all. And it does have a really nice feeling when you reach the bump stop as well. It's not that metal to metal clunking contact, but it's also not squishy either. So the material that they're using for that rubber bump stop that we looked at earlier does do a very, very good job. So yeah, to quickly summarize up to this point, I think the pedals are absolutely fine and excellent in their default configuration, but I would recommend paying that little bit extra for the performance kit, just to give you the ability to take the full advantage of the full scope of adjustment that is possible with a set of pedals like this. But then I threw a spanner in the works by installing the optional damper kit. Now, I've been pretty vocal in the past about not being a massive fan of damper kits for pedals, particularly with the Fanatec V3 pedals. I tried that damper kit out on the brake and on the throttle pedal. On the brake, I just found that it didn't really add anything of value to justify its price. And on the throttle pedal, I found even at the weakest setting, it just made the throttle pedal, although it felt nice underfoot, it made the return feel a little bit vague and lack a little bit of sensation, and sometimes even add a little bit of lag to the liftoff, which is something obviously that you don't want. Now, if you're familiar with the Husingvarl Ultimate Plus pedals, you would also know that those have integrated dampers as well. But again, I never really felt like they gave a huge or a significant advantage, I guess, over pedals that didn't run dampers. But when I installed the damper kit on these pedals, I do have to say that it did transform the driving experience. It really did just take it to that next level. And that is the case for all three of the pedals. Now, one of the things that I really like about this damper kit is it does give you the ability to actually fine tune and adjust the amount of hydraulic resistance that you're feeling across all three of the pedals. So I'm running it relatively light on the throttle pedal, but it just gives that little bit more sensation of something physical underfoot rather than just a paddle that's flapping around. Now, I know that throttle pedals feel relatively vague on most cars, and I'm sure that if a lot of you guys actually jumped into a real life race car, you'd be amazed at just how vague a lot of the pedals actually do feel in real life race cars. But we want to have something that feels, you know, relatively intuitive in a sim rig, in in the absence of other things like seat of pants feel. But having that damper on the throttle pedal really does just take it to that next level and make it as good, if not better, than any other throttle pedal that I've ever tested in the past, including the Simucube active pedals, I would say, as well, because obviously the benefits of those aside, one of the things that I didn't like or don't like about those pedals is that they do have a slightly grainy feel underfoot just due to the mechanical design of the pedals. And that obviously isn't an issue with these at all. So I would go as far as to say that this is probably the nicest feeling throttle pedal that I've ever used, right up there, I would say, with the Husingvarl Ultimate Plus pedal, which also does have that damper. And then we move across to the brake as well. I honestly didn't expect it to make a huge difference here either, but this actually does take it across to feeling like the best of the best when it comes to hydraulic brake pedals that I've tested in the past. So I would put this up there with even something like the SimTag Black pedals that I tested years ago, which are a very, very expensive set of hydraulic pedals. So yeah, again, the same kind of sensation here, just gives that sensation of a slight hydraulic resistance behind the pedal, which does feel very authentic underfoot. And again, we do have that adjustability there too, which is really nice. Although one thing that I didn't like about it is the fact that it is quite difficult to adjust that damper, as we saw a little bit earlier on in the video. And again, same sort of idea with the clutch as well, just gives that extra sensation of mechanical resistance underfoot and makes it feel a little bit more like it's mechanically connected to something inside a real car. So look, I definitely wouldn't go as far as to say that the damper kit is something that's essential, but it definitely does add to the overall driving experience, I would say. So if you can afford the extra, then it's definitely something that is worth at least considering, I would say. So when we put all these things together, I've got to say that these pedals have absolutely blown me away. I'm really, really, really impressed with them. I was impressed with the handbrake and the shifter as well, although I did have a few more nitpicks with those than I do with these pedals. I think I've done a really, really good job of the design here, and there really just isn't a whole lot to fault here. I think also when you consider the price point as well, and obviously that does vary depending on where you are in the world and the relevant taxes and shipping costs, so that is definitely an important thing to factor in. But yeah, I mean, as I said with the VRS Direct Force Pro pedal review, those are exceptional value for money. And I would actually rate these pedals a little bit higher than the VRS pedals in terms of the driving experience and what I look for in a set of pedals. And hopefully the objective observations that we've made here will also help you to determine whether these are going to suit your particular driving style and the things that you look for in a set of pedals. Now, are they perfect? Definitely not. And there are a couple of little nitpicks that I need to take you through here as well. Firstly, with regards to the base plate. Now, we haven't talked about the base plate a lot yet. No issues with it really whatsoever. Nice and easy to assemble, although there are quite a few steps involved there. It is perhaps a little bit over-engineered, but one thing that I think is going to be a little bit of a problem for some people is that you can see the heel rest is actually quite high up. So you can adjust the pedal plates, as we saw earlier, to be lower down. But in the case of the Track Racer TR120 that we're running here, we actually ended up having to adjust the seat and almost, or actually completely maxing out the maximum height of the wheel deck here. And even still, I did have a couple of issues with my knees banging into the steering wheel just because of the additional height in that heel plate. So that is one thing that you may want to consider. Just look at the measurements on your sim rig, look at the extra height that this is going to be adding to your rig and determine whether that's going to be a problem for you or not. But given the way that these pedals can mount, as we saw earlier, I would definitely not go as far as to say that the pedal plate and mount is something that is essential. I think if you're able to mount these to your existing pedal plate, then that is going to be absolutely fine. And yeah, but look, in terms of the pedal plate, no issues with flex or anything like that. It does a good job at what it does, but do just consider that extra height that it's going to be adding. Next nitpick was, as we touched on earlier, the damper on the brake is difficult to adjust because it's kind of hidden underneath the elastomer stack. You can get to it. I've got relatively small hands and it wasn't really a problem for me, but it is just that little bit fidgety. That's probably the one thing about the design here which I kind of looked at and thought, what were they thinking with that? Everything else just kind of made sense. So yeah, I thought that was worth just pointing out to you guys. And that kind of segues nicely into talking about some nitpicks that I had in terms of adjustment here. So look, these certainly aren't difficult to adjust. That's not what I'm saying here at all, but they're certainly a little bit more tricky to adjust and dial in than some of the other pedal sets that we've tested in the past. You will require tools as well to make those adjustments. So it's certainly not something that you're going to be able to just reach down in between cars and you know, pull the elastomer stack out, change the rubbers out, and be on your merry way again. To the point where I would say that probably what you'll find is a majority of people will set and forget these. So they'll spend a bit of time dialing them in, but they're not going to be adjusting what the pedal feels like to account for realism in different styles of cars, I don't think, for the majority of people, unless you're really hardcore. So that is just one thing to consider and compare with some of our other pedal reviews. Most pedals at around this kind of price point and this quality are quite similar in this regard. So it's certainly not a negative about these pedals in general, but again, just something to be aware of and to consider. Now, just with regards to the elastomer stack that we have here as well. Now, we haven't had any problems with these pedals so far, but one thing that I would just note here is that other pedal sets that we've tested in the past that use this same brand elastomer that we see here have had issues with blowing out over time. And I would also comment that the design of the elastomer stack here, without any metal cups or any sort of retaining mechanism to stop the elastomers from blowing out beyond their maximum tolerance, would potentially lend itself to these wearing out over time. Now, we've seen that occur on the BJ load cell pedals that we tested years ago now. Also, my original Husonville Ultimate pedals, the non-plus version, ran the exact same elastomers that we see here. They've actually moved with the Ultimate Plus across to a different type of elastomer, which doesn't appear to have that issue. But basically, the problem is that when you don't have a mechanism that stops the elastomer from deflecting beyond its maximum tolerance, you're putting those elastomers through a lot of cycles. And what's going to happen is they're going to weaken over time, which means they're going to soften and also potentially then crack over time too. And that's what we've seen with other pedal sets that we've tested in the past. If you look at something like the Mecha Cup 1 pedals, they have an aluminium cup around the elastomer that actually limits the amount of deflection in those before the cups actually end up touching each other. And that was a really clever design, although we have actually heard of a few people that have even had problems with elastomers on those pedals. If you look at something like the Acertec Invicta Forte and La Prima pedals, they have an actual enclosed cylinder which stops the elastomer from blowing out. So again, check out those reviews for the full details there. But again, I want to reiterate that we haven't had any problems with reliability on these pedals so far. We have put a couple of weeks of use into them now, but we have seen issues on pedals that have a similar design to this. So again, just something to be aware of. And if you do own a set of these pedals, let us know in the comments down below whether you have had any issues with reliability when it comes to those elastomers. So in summary, I've got to say that these pedals have really impressed me. Look, to be honest with you guys, over the years, I've gotten a little bit sick of reviewing pedal sets just because they often seem same. We've seen a lot of pedal sets come through here that have been very expensive without really offering anything anything particularly unique that would give me reason to recommend them over something else that's cheaper. But in the case of these pedals, I think that they are very, very fairly priced. Obviously, again, check your local pricing, taxes, import duties, shipping costs, and things like that. That will potentially have a big impact on whether these are good value for money for you personally compared to some of the other options that we've discussed today. But for me here in Australia, comparing this to what else is available at the price point, I would definitely say that these probably provide me with the best driving experience that suits my particular personal preference over anything else that I've tested around this kind of price point, which I think is a very, very impressive achievement. And I really like the way the pedals look as well. They look really clean on the rig. And yeah, look, just everywhere I look with these, it is very, very difficult to go past them. I think they're very, very good value for money. And if you're lucky enough to be in a position to buy a set of these pedals, I think you're gonna be just as impressed with these as I have been. And I think it's as simple as that, guys. Really, really impressive product, and you definitely won't be disappointed. So really hope that today's video has helped you out. If it has, please leave a thumbs up. If you want to pick up any of the gear that you've heard discussed in today's video, there'll be some links down in the description below, which of course, an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media and no additional cost to you. That's just a way that you guys can support us if you find value in what we do. So we really appreciate your support there. But above all, thank you very much for watching, guys, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.